This is how fast the Army wants to move here and how serious we are about disrupting some of the old acquisition problems that we've had. We all want to be in the cool startup situation and come up with a great idea. I think that also feeds into what the DoD is trying to say they want to do right now. We know that the big guys have lobbyists and they're constantly banging on their congressmen to get this contract.
Welcome to the Startup Defense. My name is Callye Keen. Today I have Tony Williams. Tony has a long career as an Army officer in the private sector, as an engineer, and then moving into intelligence and in innovation and many other things. Tony, can you tell us a little bit about your background, who you are, and what are you passionate about right now?
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. I am pretty passionate about disrupting the way the Pentagon buys stuff. That's it. Having been around it for so many years, I was a startup guy initially, had an engineering firm in the 90s before we all got busy at 9/11. But just noticing that we don't get the right technology out to troops fast enough, and we're stuck in this Eisenhower predicted military industrial complex, and no one's really trying to get at it. So when the Army created Futures Command, I knew about it a little bit. And I'm from Texas, but I've lived in Colorado for a long time. So I came home to check on my parents, and some guys here said, you need to talk to those guys. They're doing what you guys were talking about 15 years ago before you got busy in Iran and Afghanistan. So I just heard about it, and they asked me to come over and meet the group and some of the folks that have already PCS'd out and figure out a way to keep the momentum going that General Rainey's here to leverage, as well as our director. So I thought, well, that sounds like a good idea. If I understand what you're asking me, you want me to help you understand what the VC and the private equity community needs in order to invest and get excited about our requirements. And then you also need me to help you for the Army, maybe begin to solve some of this valley of death problem we have between grants and VC funding and that kind of thing. And that's what got me going.
It's fantastic. Your background, you have all of these pieces that really can help educate those startups to maneuver or navigate through that valley of death, because you have the actual experience in the Army, you have experience at the Pentagon and the acquisition side, seeing what the internal looks like, but you also have private experience. You're also an adjunct professor, so I suppose you're really good at presenting that information to innovative startups and saying, hey, here's the problems that need to get solved, and here's a better way to approach it. Like, have you seen that confluence really help you bring those startup innovation or those new technologies to bear for DoD?
Yeah, starting to. I'm jumping back in at the Army Applications Lab. I was looking at the connections that Andy Euclid helped develop. And so several of those companies I'm able to pick up and say, well, let's move you into the phase 2 and let me show you how to do that. And then on the VC side, I can jump in and say, hey, we just had about 30 of these guys in that were touring Futures Command, actually. And they thought that's where the innovation was. But Futures Command brought them down to us and said, will you talk to us about how you fund companies? So that's where I'm at. What type of corporate ventures, and then I run our technology vetting team too, that we need to look at. And so we've got probably right around 80 companies in our portfolio now. There's hundreds of VCs that we have a pretty good connection with, and then about 10 or 20 of them that we talk to consistently. And I think, if I can continue to let them know what we're doing, I think we can keep their interest there. Like you said, it's just a real change right now for Palo Alto and Silicon Valley, for instance, to be thinking about what's going on in defense, but they are. You've seen, I think, close to $1 billion a couple years ago came out of the VC community to fund a lot of startups, and then it jumped to $8 billion last year. So clearly there's an interest. And now Doug Beck has taken over at DIU. So he's an Apple guy that clearly Tim Cook and those guys are making the statement, and they have come out publicly and said, yes, we're interested in defense. So Apple guy reports directly to the SecDef, and then all of us innovation unit folks are closely aligned with them. And so there's a lot of energy and passion and inertia around really disrupting the way we've done business in the past with defense contractors. And when I talk to them, I usually just say, hey, I've been on your side of the fence in corporate development. I'm sure you guys already have your little VC shop put together and your little DODX program that you're trying to buy some of these small companies that we funded. And I think that's the right answer. I mean, don't lobby to push back against the Pentagon's efforts right now, because we're just trying to get technology out faster.
My startup and VC friends, they're giving me a hard time because it's saying, suddenly after 20 years, what I'm doing is cool. Working with innovative companies in the DoD and IC, it's like that was very frowned on. And now it's, I guess, accidentally the hot ticket. But inside of that space, I've put a lot of effort towards clean tech, or let's say different solutions in renewables. I found that there's a strong correlation between anything that we can do, whether it's better battery technology, where it's cooler components, really anything in that chain of value. There's direct correlation and application in the military. So it's been very easy to foster dual use startups in that space. And I know that you've done some work in clean tech as well. Is that a key area of focus for you currently?
Oh, yeah. That's what I talk about with a lot of our investors, and especially when we're just looking at simple requirements that our CG Rainy Woods, which are, figure out a way to do minefield clearing, or figure out a way to take down UAS. And then the second thing I say is do it with batteries. They're having to develop EVs that will support that type of lethality, which is new for a lot of them. And some of them don't want to hear it just because they're misinformed. And I always say, well, I don't know if you guys have been paying attention, but that's the way the DoD's been moving for years. It's moving that way when I was at Pentagon 25 years ago, man. We're all about figuring out ways to island all of our bases, for instance. We want to microgrid all our bases. We want to put batteries on everything we do. And you can make the argument that the lithium battery is just as an environmental catastrophe as fossil fuels are, and that may be true. But I can tell you this, because I talk to battery guys all the time, we're moving beyond that chemistry. And so we'll figure that out way before we'll figure out a way, to manage greenhouse gases. So let's slow down with fossil fuels and let's move towards clean energy. And in our case, you guys can look at battery powered everything you do, because that's what we're interested in.
You can see things like the lithium extraction prize that was put out by DOE and the innovation coming out of that to make it more clean across the supply chain. You can see the battery recycling challenges that have been pushed out by a lot of different organizations to try to solve the other end of that equation. But, realistically, we're putting batteries in everything, and we're making them, as modular as possible. I mean, you've even seen core batteries like your standard radio batteries, right? Like your standard radio batteries, your standard man-pack batteries, 2590s all switch over a long time ago, but now custom form factor, wearable batteries. And it's like, that's really great. But yeah, the chemistry is changing. The manufacturing processes are changing. The recycling is changing. But that's all around the additional capacity and capability of just down to that battery. It's really interesting to reach into the startup market, or in that sense, the academic market, right? Going in and looking at licensing, university, intellectual property, research that's being done at national labs, and turning that IP into a product, into a business, and think like, who has the scale that I need? Well, if I can make a better battery for big army, I'm going to be doing okay. I'm going to do okay for myself.
100%. And that's the batteries or whatever little piece of technology we're trying to move. That's the thought, right? If I can get my product into the Army, and maybe instead of some of the other agencies or even branches of government, not only am I going to be able to make some money here, but I can get good test data back, because we're going to be at scale. That's what I want to see start happening when we move these companies forward. I want to see their product get out there by the hundreds, especially some of these UAS or swarm drone technology programs that we're looking at.
I know you've jumped into AAL, and there's a large portfolio that AAL is working with on all sides of that partnership, including just the startups themselves. And maybe this is a question for a future time, but if you have some case studies or some technologies that you're really excited about, that's always a fun question for people working with startups. I know it's hard to pick favorites, and we really shouldn't pick favorites because we want to see everyone win and flourish. But is there anything that you're really, really excited about that you'd like to highlight today?
One of my favorite ones is just a story we have on a private up here at Fort Cavazos now that said, hey, I could really use some help, maybe with some, technology that makes it so I don't have to go back and look at the manual every time we're doing maintenance on this tank or whatever. And they said, yeah, man, well, we get some VR goggles and you can be looking at in those goggles what you should be doing right then. And if you have a question, you can just hit that and you'll go to the next page and that kind of thing. And that company came to us and said, is that what you want to do? And we said, yeah, that's cool. And so now that's a success story. So a company called Tactile, and they are into the phase 3 now. I think they're in their first or second series. So they're doing well. It's just one of the great success stories we have. And I just love that because that gets at the kind of the non-lethality projects that I'm interested in. And then we've got some clean energy one too, where some folks are proposing some different ways of messing with ionization between hydro batteries and tanks and that kind of thing. And they want to make a little power plant for us. So that looks pretty promising too. Then there's, I don't know if General Rainey wants us to concentrate on this, but there's 5 or 6 of them which are just pure human performance improvement wearables, and even female mannequins for combat medics to work with, because apparently we've never had female mannequins. We always just train everyone on male part mannequins, which is not what they'll be doing all the time. Now, granted, it's a lesser percentage. There's that I really like too, because that shows, some interest in projects across the Army. But our budget's not as big as AFWorks, certainly not DIU and some of the others. So we got to be careful where we place our bets. If I'm talking to a startup or someone who has something we're interested in, like we just advertised and picked a few firms to help us in the HVTOL, the heavily vertical takeoff and landing project, can be a helicopter or a drone or something else that allows us to move 800 to 1,400 pounds pretty simply. And we just try to define the problem and let the companies come up with the solution and the technology. We're not going to go, there's no old school specifications and we, give you that. And that's not how it works. So we just went through that one. We got some pretty good responses. So I'm pretty excited about that helping us because we can move product and people with that HVTOL unit that we're looking at right now. And it's pretty easily deployable so we can, get to scale. And that's the other thing about what we do is we need to have the prototype within 3 years. It's very important. So this is not going to be some 8, 10, 20-year program like old DoD acquisition standards. This has to be fast. In fact, the requirements that we get from General Rainey, and that's who's kind of driving some of where we're focused right now, which is an evolution at AAL. In the past, the commanding generals, they weren't really sure. They just said, look at what big Army needs and see if you can figure out what the troops need. And so we would go do that ourselves. Now, General Rainey says, no, specifically, we're having this, and this problem in Ukraine. We need to support better. We need this type technology, whether it's mine clearing or whatever. We need to improve, the MICLIC from 30 years ago. So that's the kind of stuff that gets thrown at me in the insights and analysis group is, all right, go do market research on what's available. And then let's start getting some proposals in here and we'll vet them and see, if the physics even works on some of the proposals. So it's very much more, think of it this way. So it's very much for kind of battlefield focused right now with General Rainey at AAL. So we just had our quarterly briefing with him yesterday. And, I was telling him, how it works in the VC world, because none of these guys know that. I'm telling them all the time, a VC is not going to be interested in our deal unless we can move fast. So I'm putting out that we want this, sir, and you want to buy it, and it's going to happen. And then that gets them excited because just like InQtel and some of our other innovation unit kind of government VC shops, they know that if we can do a lot of the vetting. They don't have to pay to do that. And as a VC, that's a pretty good deal. So that's kind of what I was letting him know. So I said, that's exciting. You can give us good kind of guidance on what you really need and what you're seeing, then we can move forward on that. And I can get the VCs and the private equities interested in doing that first series for these guys once we get them the grants from SBIR. That's how it's kind of rolling right now.
Absolutely. Thank you for detailing that process, because it really shows how this has evolved from the past, right? Something interesting that I've seen as well is that now there's these more open solicitations, even innovation challenges, very open prize competitions. You see, if you go to AAL, there's not an open one right now on the website, but you can regularly go and they'll say, you know, we're asking for submissions for X. Same thing with HalfWorks or other organizations. I know as a product developer or startups that we work with, they know that, hey, this is a strong market signal from a great potential customer and partner that this is important, because we've seen in the past, now 5G on the move, I'll pick on that right now, is it's a big push. And to be fair, there is a lot of activity, acquisition activity, investment, and actual innovations going behind 5G on the move right now. But in the past, there would be an item that everyone was talking about and was perceived as very important, but there was no really way for smaller firms to get involved in pursuing that like directive. We want activity in this space, but how do I get involved in that? And now there is. So even if I don't put a submission out, if I'm running an accelerator, or if a friend is running an accelerator, I can say, hey, I know that the Army's looking for this thing because they keep running open opportunities for this, or they keep funding people through SBIRs around this topic. And so this is sending pretty strong market signals across people that want to start businesses, people that want to launch startups, or even I would say down to commercial and university research, because it's an area that's being funded. There's a first customer in the DoD in that space. So it's very interesting to see that situation evolve. And so from a research on the other side, you're researching for what exists and like, what can we get into this program? There's people like me that are researching who cares about things that I know how to do. If I keep seeing those market signals, I'm going to develop a product whether I participate in that program or not.
That's it. Actually, I was happy to see that when I came over, is Casey and the rest of the team is, you know, the PhDs we have come out of the last 4 years since starting this up. And they figured out that let's don't do anything in our BAAs or our SBIR announcements and requests except vaguely define the problem. Let's let the market respond and let's see what we get. And if it looks like there's 4 or 5 companies that do things already good together, we can create a cohort, which we've done, and we can build this product that way. So that's kind of the exciting part. That's really the disruptive part for the government for sure, because, you know, the government, and I fight it still now. So the acquisition folks who've been around for years, they're so afraid that, and they should, especially if they're risk averse, they're so afraid that, you know, the government is going to get some type of protest because one company said, well, you guys didn't define your requirements, you know, specifically, and this other company won. I think that it took, you know, some pretty good leadership to say, well, yeah, that might happen, but we're still just going to go with a vaguely defined problem and see what the market brings to us. And sometimes, some of them I've looked back at, some of the data on some of the projects that we've asked for proposals on through SBIR announcements, we didn't really define it well enough, so we didn't get back anything we could use. So there's also, you know, back to the drawing board, let's start again. And then there's the scale part of it and that kind of thing. If I were a small manufacturer that it was hoping to do business with the DoD, it'd be just like you say, is we'll figure out what they're trying to buy now, what's going on, and maybe we can build something like that later. I don't know what type of equipment we'll need to buy to build that, but maybe we can later. Let's respond to this SBIR phase 1, where all it is basically a little R&D opportunity for us to talk about what we could do. And so that gets the conversation going.
That's great advice. Let's walk through this a little bit, because at the beginning of our chat, you talked about the valley of death. Ooh, it's the shudder. Then with commercial startups, it really is like hey, I get a little bit of traction. Maybe I get some pre-seed or seed funding, but then jumping that scale, it's a big jump, especially I mean, I make physical products, right? So it's not like software where it's just, hey, I can prototype and then it's more organic growth or even geometric style growth is still palatable. With physical products, if I have to buy a mold, it might be $100,000 of tooling, so zero to just that one piece, right? So there's significant scale costs. How do you see navigating that for innovative startups that are pursuing, federal opportunities?
I always try to put myself where they are, and I started up my little environmental engineering firm in the 90s, and we just started from nothing and then ended up doing work for the military around basins, around some of their facility motor pools where they had horrible groundwater contamination. We just kind of fell into that, but it was the same thing. They wanted ways to clean that up without taking everything to the landfill. And we're like, well, great, but I can't afford to wait on a $500,000 receivable from you for 3 or 4 months. Back then, there wasn't all this VC and private equity money running around. So it was hard back then. We barely made it. Now, I think that if I'm putting together a business plan and maybe you see something that you feel like you can do, maybe you're coming out of industry like you or out of one of the university labs or something like that, answer that Cyber One call, see if you can figure out how you're going to find investment while you're waiting on that phase 2, after you've got that phase 1, maybe when you're successful. And so have a plan. Don't just win the little R&D piece and say, we got the Cyber phase 1. Let's just go to work and we'll write a big report and we'll tell the Army that, yeah, we can do it. And here's how we're going to do it. No, go start talking to VCs right then. Figure out how you might float through that valley of death if the government can't respond fast enough with that phase 2 or that hopefully that phase 3. And I think now's the time that it would be well received in the VC community because they understand it. We had about 30 of them in last week, and that's what they talked about. They're like, well, that company did real well with you guys, but I was really worried that you guys weren't going to fund them. And it did take you a long time, but it was a good thing they had a VC partner. Yeah, that's what we're talking about here. That's the risk that you guys have to take, but they hate doing that. They hate funding with that second or third tranche while they're waiting on the Army or CIBR to fund the second or third phase. So maybe if you had some type of plan and you felt like that you had a good 1, 2, or 3 VC partners waiting with you, you might be able to do it. But some of these companies that I've seen get in trouble, they just, they got their first round of funding, they maybe have the CIBR, and then everything stops for 12, 14, 15 months, and they're not prepared. They don't have VC relationships. They're scrambling then. And, in private equity and VC world, when you're scrambling is when the VCs are like, whoa, wait, what's going on? This is scaring me. So have a plan.
Yeah, I love that. Certainly after phase 1 is a good place for a seed investment, at least. And it's good for everybody that's listening to understand that it can easily take 6 months, even a pre-seed seed investment. So really, if you're looking at the period of performance on a phase 1, as soon as you have something that's tangible and you can build a pitch deck, I would start socializing and building those relationships and having conversation. Yeah, and that puts you in a good position to have conversations. There's a host of, I'd call them seed to right up to Series A investors that are in that niche right now, they're looking for SBIR, early traction, DoD, potentially dual use startups. We had a group at one of my accelerators, and that's really where they focus. Hard tech, DoD applications, downstream dual use with additional funding because commercial requires scale. But they only invest after somebody is outside of an SBIR or a similar type of award. That might be a large grant opportunity, or there's innovation challenges that are fairly large as well. But that's what they look for, market traction through those programs. I thought, man, that's really interesting. And then I was doing some more research, talking to other investors, and they're like, yeah, that's kind of where we are. We want to catch them early. And that's the equivalent of catching people early in this market, is to really connect with people, like you, Tony, and say, hey, we want to position ourselves. We want to see what you've got. We want to invest before or with InQtel or before Lockheed or some of the other bigger investors that are in the dual use space. That's really, really good advice. I appreciate that.
No, you're right on it. You could have said it more from the startup's perspective or the VC perspective with the startup. If they can catch them early, that's good for everybody, and especially if they know that they won their first SBIR. Like I said before, when I was on the other side, I thought, wow, if there are government entities that are doing the technology vetting and then awarding that SBIR, I want to know that company before they do anything, right?
Yeah. To be fair, a lot of investors, they're very savvy about the business models or potential BD that's in a space, but they don't necessarily have people on the team that can vet the tech itself. And so either they have to hire a nerd like me, or they have to go to like university and they have to team with somebody to say, hey, like, Tony, walk me through this. Is this real? Does the physics work? Like you said. And a lot of those problems are just alleviated when they know somebody is working with them. There's somebody, let's dive in deeper. Oh, they're working with this national lab. So like I can be reasonably assured that the output of that research is pretty good if they're working with NREL or, et cetera. And so it's doing a lot of DD work for investors. And I think that's part of the big shift is to realize like I can invest in hard tech. And I know that the tech isn't vaporware because you're working with very credible organizations that are proofing through the tech itself.
That's it. And we're trying to lead as a small innovation unit among the others. We're trying to put together some metrics around that. So what have we looked at? What have we vetted? What have we brought through phase 1 or phase 2? What companies, like some of them I mentioned earlier, are mostly dual use firms? What are just DoD focused? And let's put together some type of annual report which says the ROI for the Army is based on the following 35 metrics. We did pretty good, or we've got 43% that were funded through SBIR, and another 32% were funded through VCs, and then another 10% are into prototype or production in a phase 3, or they have other RTD&E money that's outside of our purview anyway. So they're off and running. We are just kind of, held to the mission that we need to make all of that happen and be able to measure it within 3 years. And so that's what we're trying to do. And that's why when I talk to some of the potential startups we might work with, I try to give them that talk. This is how fast the Army wants to move here, and how serious we are about disrupting some of the old acquisition problems that we've had.
My big metric, and I'll just throw this out there, you throw it right away, but my big metric is, at the end of the day, is contracts, the money that Army or whatever entity actually spends with the startups. That's the thing. Because I firmly believe there's a really soft outcome. This is a big soft outcome, is that people are going to get interested in defense innovation itself. And it's already attracted lots of smart people. You can see Anduril and Shield and, previously Palantir and some of these other great organizations. And that there's more and more like gravity towards this industry. So that net is fantastic. But right in the brass tacks of things is, at the end of the day, Lockheed's the biggest. Raytheon's the next biggest. GD's in there. And they're all obviously world-class organizations, but where is XYZ startup? Yeah, are they in the top 1,000, or are the startups breaking into the top 100 in spend, or top 1,000, or what's that allocation of spend in emerging technology startups where they got contracts? And that's going to be really, really hard to measure, but that would be very inspiring to see, like, hey, there's just new market entrants that are on this list, and they're literally competing for the same dollars that Boeing is. Again, no slight to Boeing, but innovation, competition, those are pretty strong American values.
I know, you're right. It is like the main metric. Where was the spend? Okay, let's see it. Let's see what the Army's doing that doesn't show it's all one of the integrators, one of the big contractors. So I think, that's why I kind of came back in to do this on the government side for a little while, is I think there's enough really leverage behind this disruption idea that it'll probably happen. It's not just a bunch of talk. All of us have been in DC. We know that the big guys have lobbyists and they're constantly banging on their congressmen to get this contract or that. That's the way it works. And that's fine. They can keep doing that. But like I said before, that they also need to have their little technology sub that's trying to buy smaller companies, and then they need to have their own VC operation, because this is the way it's all going to start going. I mean, look at most of us as engineers. I mean, we started, we want to be engineers because we want to build stuff. We don't want to go to some big corporation and do that day in, day out. We're not really doing anything yet, but you guys keep, your drudgery of maybe designing 1/1000th of this project. And so none of us want to do that. We all want to be in the cool startup situation and come up with a great idea. I think that also feeds into what the DoD is trying to say they want to do right now. I worked for him when I was there, Ash Carter. I mean, he used to say when I was at DITRA, he was OSD, ALT, I think Deputy Secretary. So he acquisition, logistics, technology secretary. So, but he would say back then, and then he became the Secretary of Defense for Obama, but he would say, hey, Silicon Valley will change the way the defense world turns. And I remember thinking, well, that was 20 years ago. What does he mean by that? And what he means by that is right now, we will get technology out faster with the startup kind of model that's in place already in Silicon Valley for software and other platforms like that they've been working on. Let's take that type of approach and put it in defense. And that's what I think we do have some good inertia with right now.
I agree. Like I said, I spent my whole life doing this, and it's funny that what you just said, because I say my personal mission is to make cool stuff. That's really all it is. I've designed my whole life so I make cool stuff with as many other people as possible. So just make more, right? But that's why I like this industry, because I can come up with an idea, I can pitch it to customers, and they have the money to fund that idea, and we make things. Certainly that is a very startup approach to how it has been in the past, where, I don't want to work on a piece of a thing. I want to come up with an idea that I think is really interesting. I want to go show it to some customers and get feedback like tomorrow. I want to go to a demo with a thing that I just made up and go show it off to somebody and tell me that's horrible and tell me all the reasons why it would be better, and come back a month later and get some money to build something interesting. I don't know other industries that you can do that.
That's it. That's exactly it.
Tony, I really appreciate you taking the time to be on the show. I know you're super busy. Where's a great place where people can follow what you're up to and maybe connect with you?
Yeah, just at our website, that aal.mil, I think, is the best place. We put pretty much everything we do on there. And then, surprisingly, we use LinkedIn as our main social outreach piece of media right now. So we're always on there talking about our people, what we're looking for. We advertise those SIVers on there. So that's a good place too. And then our headquarters, Army Future Command, is a good site to look at too, to see what we're doing in a larger way. And then I would say the good news is we have a pretty, even though he's an infantry guy, our 4-star General Rainey here, he's a very forward-thinking, kind of progressive acquisition guy. And he even says he wants to kill the old acquisition chain. That's his idea. And he wants us at AAL to help him do that. And so right now our leadership is all about doing that. He's not afraid to put that out publicly. He's not afraid to talk to defense contractors, old school defense contractors that way. So just look for what he's talking about and look for what we're putting out too on LinkedIn and on our site, and respond. That's how you can get involved with this.
I really appreciate that. And as a side note, I try to drive this home for everyone that we're talking to, everyone in the audience, is DoD federal market, not huge, not really crushing it on social media, but on LinkedIn, pretty much anybody you want to connect with and any program, they have an excellent presence. It's not very hard to keep up to date with what's going on and what opportunities are out there. So thanks for reinforcing. Well, if people think that I'm crazy, just go on there. You can follow anybody that you want, and they're posting excellent information. So it's a great resource.
Posting stuff, and I respond to stuff as much as I can from the outside. Having been on the, in startup and in corporate development, I'm happy to respond, because I know how it is when you're trying to get started.
Thank you so much, Tony.
Yeah, sure, Ed. Thanks, Kelly. Take care.
This has been the Startup Defense.